Our plan today is to provide a high-level overview of the Service platform. This is intended both for new administrators as well as existing users who would simply like a general refresher of Service's capabilities and kind of some best practices. So we'll start our time today by engaging the platform from the volunteer perspective. After this, we'll take a look at the main dashboard, which is what we're looking at right now, kind of the first thing you see as an admin when you log in. From there, we'll deep dive different parts of the system, or I should say kind of shallow dive. We'll look over a lot of different things. We'll talk about some subjects and things that you need to get started, and maybe some features that you're not aware of yet. So we'll walk through opportunities and kind of different features within that, talk about the sign-in console, stickers, impact tracking. We'll also look at the volunteer database side of the system, how to run some common searches, sending emails, managerial tasks like reporting, and then we'll briefly discuss groups and how you can interact with groups in Service as well. After that, and at the very end, we'll take a look at some resources that are available to you, talk about the customer support tool, talk about other recorded webinars, other material. Like I said, please feel free to ask questions throughout this entire time. We'll address those towards the end, and our staff will also be responding throughout the call. So to begin, we are going to start from the volunteer perspective. So we're actually going to move away from this admin dashboard and switch over to an embedded example where I have Service embedded into a website. Now, we can talk about integration independently and separately. If you have questions about this, please feel free to ask. But I want to point something out. Typically, I recommend sending volunteers to a landing page first, where they might make some kind of incremental decision, whether they're expressing if they're a new volunteer or an existing volunteer or part of a group, or perhaps you want to have people select what kind of programming they're interested in before they see your events. But ultimately, when a volunteer is engaging with Service, they're going to see a page like this. This is your event listing page. This is where your opportunities get posted. This can be filtered, so it's displaying a certain set of events, or you can send people to all of your events at one time, or you can have people engage with a calendar view version of this page, or perhaps a map view of this page. You can also direct people to specific opportunities as you need to. There's a lot of different ways to present volunteers to a page like this. It really depends on your onboarding and recruiting, what you might want to do in that capacity. There's one other kind of caveat I want to add here. You can have volunteers log in first before they see any opportunities if you want to have people kind of follow that pipeline. It really depends on what your onboarding needs to look like. But on this page, when a volunteer finds something that they are interested in, let's back up and use a different example here. Then they can click to learn more about it. And when they do that, they can read more about the opportunity that you've posted. And when they're ready to sign up, they can do so. When they click on sign up, it's going to take them through an account check page. Now, I was logged in previously, so it remembers me. As an administrator, you always have to put your password in. Volunteers, that's not necessarily the case. If they're using the same device, the system will remember them. But let's say I'm new. I can plug in my information here. If the system recognizes me, then it will just ask me for my password. And if I don't know it, I can reset it on the next screen. If the system does not recognize me, so I'll use my wife's name here, then it will ask me to create a new profile. So I don't already have an account. I'm gonna have to go and create a new profile. Once I complete creating my account, which might include signing terms and conditions, then I will be able to complete my registration. So new volunteers and existing volunteers can kind of follow the same pipeline when they're signing up for an opportunity. Let's go ahead and log in and do a registration. So if we meet the requirements for an event, we'll be greeted with this registered successfully message. From there, there's other things that I could do. Maybe I want to sign up one of my kids or my wife for that same event. I could go and create a profile for them and sign them up. Maybe I want to sign myself up for another opportunity. I can do that here. There's other things a volunteer can do generally. I could back up and view kind of like a main dashboard, and I can view all my registration activity. I can go and edit my account, upload documents, view documents that have been posted. I can download a report of my activity history. Maybe I need to turn those hours in somewhere. So there's things that volunteers can do in their profile. And we have some short form videos that direct volunteers into some of those things, like printing their own activity history. But generally speaking, once a volunteer signs up for an event, that's probably what they were targeting. So they're most likely just going to close out of the browser and move on with their day. So this is kind of the standard workflow for a volunteer. Now, there are a lot of ways to vary that process. You can have restrictions in place that volunteers may or may not meet the requirements for, in which case they might be greeted with a failure message instead that directs them to do something else. You can have opportunities posted with like an application approval process. So you have to vet individuals before they can be approved for an event. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of vary what this process looks like. And again, that really gets into how do you need to onboard volunteers? How do you want to present things to volunteers? Okay, so that's the volunteer side of the system. Now let's switch gears and jump back over to the admin side. So we're going to be taking a look at the admin dashboard. But the first thing that I want to do actually is talk about logging in. So Service does not have a centralized admin login page. If you go in Google Service admin login, you will probably wind up on someone else's account, and therefore you won't be able to log in. So you want to make sure that when you're logging in, it references your organization at the top of the login page, maybe has your logo up at the top. If you're not sure where your login link is, please just email support@servicetech.com. We can let you know. But this is a page you should bookmark. Now, once you've logged in as an admin, you'll be greeted with your admin dashboard. There's 4 different headings here. At the top, we have volunteer and opportunity management. This is where you're going to spend most of your time. This is kind of the front office side of the system. This is where we run searches, send emails, post opportunities, manage registrations, run reports. It's also where we open the sign-in console. So all the things that you are going to do in the system are going to be in these top 2 sections. The bottom 2 sections, attribute and system management, are more like the back office side. If you need to make changes to the way the system functions or how things look or what's presented to volunteers or what data are we collecting from volunteers, a lot of that stuff is going to be found in here. And most of that is actually found in the system configuration. So let's take a look there real quick. Under system management, if we click on edit system configuration, this is where all of your global settings are. Only administrators have access to this. Your leadership team, other access users cannot engage with the system configuration. There's a lot of different sections in here. We're not going to walk through all of this right now, but if you have not done so, I would encourage you just to glance through it, expand the sections, and kind of get your eyes on the different settings in here. You don't have to necessarily read every single tooltip, but if you have questions about something, obviously that's a good place to start. And you can, of course, always engage with our support team and ask questions there as well. There are a few sections in here I do want to highlight to you. If you're newer to your system, if you've not engaged with it before, you might be wondering, how do we edit what's on our application, what data we're collecting from volunteers? That's found in information collection here, as well as custom volunteer profile fields. So there's some kind of standardized questions you can turn on or off, make required or optional. You can reorder the questions on your application, and you can always add custom fields in as well if you need to add additional questions to your application that aren't already being asked. And when I say application here, you might also think of this as like a profile. This is a volunteer creating a new account, when they're first working with you. So this is one section that if you've never been in here before, you might want to check out and just make sure that this aligns with what data you would like to be collecting from your volunteers. And then I also want to point out there's a few things in here where you can modify the way service looks, how you're communicating with volunteers, like page content. This has different welcome messages at the tops of different pages, and you can always obviously go in here and edit those things. If you're not sure what this message is or where this is presented to volunteers, there's also always a preview icon here, which you can use to check out where this actually is in situ in your database. So this is a good thing to check out if you've never looked in there. A lot of this language is pretty boilerplate to begin with, and I always recommend editing that and just making it, match how you want to communicate. So that's that page content. Same kind of thing with email message content. Service sends a lot of emails. When a volunteer signs up for an event, they get a confirmation message. That confirmation message always looks like this. There's a little preview icon here. It has the volunteer's name, has a little intro paragraph, and then it has all the data from the event itself. So if you want to customize this message, you can do that in here. Right? Same kind of thing for reminder emails. Volunteers can get a reminder email after a certain number of days before each shift. You can have thank you messages sent out. So this is just a good place, again, to edit how you're communicating with volunteers. One other section I want to point out, there's a system appearance section. If you want to change the way service looks in terms of colors and logos and styling options and fonts, that stuff is all in here. If you have questions about anything in your database in terms of how it looks or how to modify things, you can always use our customer support tool. Speaking of, that is at the bottom of the page. No matter what page you are on in Service, you will see this Need Help button. And if you click on that, it'll ask, how can we help? This is not like an AI chatbot. This is searching our knowledge base. So let's say we want to learn more about reservation codes. I could search by that term. This will show articles that have to do with that. If you find something you're interested in, excellent. This is a very good resource. We do a lot of work to maintain these. Personally, I prefer to pop these out. I think they're easier to view as a separate page, but that's obviously up to you. So this is a good resource by itself, but no matter what you've searched by, whether or not you found articles that meet the kind of question you had, you can always click on Contact Us and then submit a ticket through here. Our customer support team has posted hours of Monday through Saturday, 8:30 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Inside that window, you can always expect a very speedy response. They will get back with you shortly, and they are excellent. I would definitely encourage you to use this tool. Okay, before we move on from the system configuration, there's one theme that I want to point out throughout Service, and that would be this update button here. No matter what page you are working on in Service, when you are making changes and you want to publish or save those changes, there's going to be some kind of update button that you will need to click. If we do not click on that, it will scrap any changes that we've made. If I just go back to the main dashboard here, or if I use up at the top of the page, this navigation bar to go back to one particular part of the database or just move over to a different part of the database, it's going to scrap whatever changes we had made. So that's something that's good to bear in mind. If you are updating something, if you're creating something, you're going to need to click a button that kind of confirms all the data or submits the information that you've just posted. Okay, one more thing from the main dashboard that I want to point out, and then we're going to drill down into opportunities and talk about setting those up and kind of what those are. Up at the top of the page, I just kind of mentioned this navigation bar. This is a very helpful tool, especially once you're more comfortable with the system. It will allow you to jump around without having to go back to the main dashboard. It also remembers where you were working. So let's say I was editing this event. I can go in and make some changes in here. And then I realized, I actually wanted to make someone else the organizer, but they don't have an account yet, right? So I could go over to the volunteer database side, add a profile for that person, set the correct access level to event leader here. And once I've made this account, then I can jump straight back into that event because it remembers which one I was working on, and I can just go right back into updating that. So this is a helpful tool. It can just make you navigate a little bit faster once you're more comfortable with where things are. On the far right-hand side, there's also a profile icon. This tells you who's logged in, how much access they have to the system, and then also how much time is remaining on their login, right? So if you step away from your desk, you're going to get logged out after a certain amount of minutes. This is a setting in the system configuration, and in particular under security and privacy settings. But that number will just kind of tick down as you're sitting in the system, as you're working on things. If you click on anything, that number will get re-upped. So we could sit here and watch this tick down if we want to. We don't have time for that today. So if we click on anything here, it's going to renew automatically to 90 minutes, any action that we might take. One other thing I want to point out in here is that you can also switch to view the system from the volunteer perspective. So we started today on the volunteer side. You can actually use your own admin profile as a volunteer account. So when you're logged in, you can go over to this profile icon, click on View as Volunteer Access Level, and switch to that side of the system. This is what I did earlier when I was kind of testing, registering for an event, that sort of stuff. So you can use your own profile to do that. You are more than welcome to create test accounts if you'd like to. But just from an ease of use perspective, I prefer to use my own profile. Then I don't have to make a bunch of accounts and remember a bunch of different passwords. All right, we are going to dive into opportunities next. This is kind of one of the main pillars within Service in terms of being able to utilize the system well. What we refer to as opportunities is any way that you would have volunteers record hours themselves or sign up for shifts. So you might post some vacancies and ask volunteers, I need X number of people at this date and time, or you might just have a long form position you want people to apply for, or you have things where volunteers just record their hours themselves. But any of those things fall under the moniker of opportunity. If we go into add a new opportunity, we'll see up at the top, we have this opportunity type, which is either normal events, time slot events, or service projects. There is actually another type of event called a paid event. If you need to accept payments from individuals when they are signing up for particular shifts or events, then please let us know. Submit a ticket. You can learn more about that there. But the two event types that are normally here are shift driven, and that is how I would think of this. We can see a normal event as the first item. That's the default. There is a singular start date and time and a singular end date and time. So we have one shift happening. We're asking volunteers to arrive at this start time and leave at this end time. And of course, there can be some variance there, and we can track that. We can record who was late and if people stayed late and adjust their hours accordingly. But generally speaking, this is the shift that you're asking people to sign up for. So that's a normal event. There's basically one shift. A time slot event is kind of an expansion on that concept. Maybe I have 5 different jobs that I want volunteers to select between. So we could create 5 different time slots. Each of them could have their own start date and time, an end date and time, right? They could be independent times. Maybe this is a back-to-back shifts throughout the course of a day. I have 2-hour blocks for a whole day, something like that. Or maybe these are all happening concurrently, and I just need to express volunteers the difference between some jobs that they might sign up for. So time slots can be used in really any of those capacities. Another very common usage of time slots is I have the same event on a recurring basis. This is 5 days a week, or it's the same shift every morning and afternoon, every day of the week. Time slot events are good at generating those types of events as well. We'll look at a tool in a little bit here, how we can repeat time slots. So if you have a recurring event that happens on a regular basis, whether it's daily, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, you can repeat shifts to generate those calendars. You do not need to make that by hand. Let me show you a couple examples of time slot events to kind of clarify what we're looking at here, and then we'll move into service projects. So if we jump back over to the volunteer side of the system, I have a few time slot events set up right now. Some of them are fairly obvious. The sort and repack, you can see it has a date range here, and then it says multiple shifts available. This is that idea of like a recurring event. If we click into this one, you can see that I have shifts occurring kind of 5 days out of the week, and volunteers can just go and pick what day works best for them. So they kind of are all the same shift, 1 to 4 p.m., and a volunteer would just go and say, this is the date that I want to come in and sign up for that particular shift. Now, in this case, I have set up this time slot event so that volunteers can pick more than one shift. So when someone gets through the registration process, they'll be presented with like a checklist, and they can pick as many as they want to. So this is an example of a time slot event. This is, again, that idea of like a recurring event, right? Another example, if we jump down here a bit, I have an event called Neighborhood and School Cleanup. This is an event that's kind of like a single day, and I have a bunch of different jobs happening concurrently. Now there's a slight variance between some of these shifts, but most of them are the same exact date and time. What a volunteer is picking here is what job they'd like to do, essentially what team they're on. In this case, that's kind of how I've labeled it. For time slots, this label is referred to as the time slot note. If we look back at creating a time slot here, that's this far right-hand column. On my previous example, that recurring event, I left these notes off. That would be irrelevant. They're all the same thing, and that would just kind of get redundant, right? But in this example, it's pretty important because that's what's defining the difference between these different time slots. And of course, you can do lots of different things in between, multiple events on different days with different shifts and all that sort of stuff. You have like a large scale festival over a week, something like that. That could ostensibly be in one time slot event, although sometimes it's better to break that up. And we can talk more about that, but you can have like different details and restrictions and things like that. Okay, so this is the idea of a time slot event. Again, we're creating multiple different shifts. Now, I want to point out a couple tools with time slot events as far as creating those, and then we'll get into service projects. So the first thing I want to mention is if you have a large scale time slot event where there's a lot of similarity. So let's take that school cleanup event that I just pointed out. All of those had the same exact start date and time and end date and time with one exception. So I could use a bulk update function here. By default, all of these shifts are selected. If I wanted to deselect something, I could do that. But if we go down below the time slots, I can display bulk update options, and I could bulk update any of kind of these features, right? So we can modify multiple shifts at one time. This is really helpful if you have kind of similar shifts. The other tool is that repeat function. So I want to show that real quick. The repeat function is used after you create a time slot event. So what we would do, let's take my example of that sort and repack. That example has one shift that got repeated on different days of the week. So to create that event from scratch, I would only make one shift initially because I had that 1 to 4 p.m. If I had a morning shift and an afternoon shift, or let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday is different than Tuesday, Thursday, then I might have to make multiple templates here, and then I'll repeat those separately. But in the example that I just shared, I had one template. It's all kind of the same thing, 1 to 4 p.m. So what I would do is just build out my event, and it could be pretty bare bones. There's only a few required fields here, but I would create the opportunity. And then once I've done that, we can go into search and manage opportunities. And for time slot events specifically, there is a function to manage time slots. So we can click into that. And then each of these time slots has its own repeat button next to it. So if this was the event that I had just created from scratch, there would be one shift here. I could click on repeat time slot, and I would pick what days of the week to repeat this on. I choose what frequency. So is this every week? Is it every other week? Is it just once a month? And then I choose when to start this range and when to end this range. I do want to point out this range is inclusive. So the shift that we're looking at here is October 29th. If this same thing happens, let's say every day for the remainder of October and all of November, right? What I would do is click on repeat time slot, choose which days of the week, choose the frequency. So if it's every day, we'd say weekly. This starts on, though, I already have a shift on the 29th, so I want to start on the 30th. I don't want to make another shift on the 29th. And then, of course, the end range, if we're going through the end of November, whatever you pick through there. Okay. That's just kind of a quick look at that. If you need more help regarding creating repeating or recurring time slot events, we have some articles on that subject, as well as some other videos. The third type of opportunity that's normally visible here is service projects. So service projects are a bit of a left turn. They're not the same thing as opportunities as events in the sense that we are not creating shifts. Service projects are more like long form activities. You can see there's no times here. Instead, I have a date range during which this project is considered active. So this could be something like an internship or a coaching position that has a fixed date range associated with it, in which case I obviously want that reflected through here, right? Maybe I'm recruiting a new intern to start at the beginning of August and be done in December. In that case, obviously I want this date range to reflect what that actual time frame is for this particular project, right? If, however, you have something that's just ongoing, right? I need a volunteer who's going to consistently come in and operate as an office aide, or maybe they're doing their own thing, kind of reporting their own activity, but there's no real date range associated with this. You can push the end date back as far as you would like to. Under the advanced options, when creating a service project, at the bottom, there's a setting that says display service project dates, and we can set this to no. Okay, so that's kind of one major difference between a project versus an event, is this idea of having a range as opposed to creating shifts. But the other big thing that distinguishes an event versus a project is that then within the project itself, volunteers are logging activity as they serve. Now, you don't necessarily have to allow volunteers to log activity. The default setting here actually is set to admin only, so you could record hours on behalf of a volunteer. Or sometimes we can use service projects just to receive applications. Like I want to find out who's interested in becoming an ambassador for a certain type of opportunity, right? So we have a couple settings here. If we leave this as admin only, volunteers can't record their activity into this project, but we could also say online or on-site or both. Online means that a volunteer can log into their account and just record their hours. So if this was like an intern or a coaching position or something, when a volunteer serves, then they can log into their account and they can just record how many hours they served that day or what they did that day. So they could log in and say, today I worked for 2.5 hours, here's what I did. And they could add some notes in there. Or they could say, I was here last week on Thursday for 2.5 hours and here's what I did. So they could kind of just go and record their hours directly into the system. On-site means that volunteers have to use the sign-in console or some kind of sign-in process. So this could be a kiosk that you have set up. We'll look at the sign-in console in a little bit here. Or it could be letting someone use their own phone. You can have mobile sign-in turned on for any event or project, which would basically let a volunteer use their own phone to sign in when they arrive and sign out when they leave, which would record exactly how long they were there. So in this case, this is functioning kind of more like a punch card or a time clock rather than having volunteers just kind of retroactively record their hours like what we saw with online. Okay, so this definition is obviously the biggest thing that distinguishes an event versus a project. Events, we're creating shifts. I need X number of people at this date and time to do this job. Whereas projects, I'm going to have people who are in the project who just record their hours as they serve. All right. So that is kind of a general definition between the different types there. I want to point out a few features that are important when you're creating maybe your first opportunity or really any opportunity in the system. So if we go back and look at adding a normal event from scratch, obviously we need a name for the event. We need a description section. This is what your volunteers will see as all the details about the event. So like what to expect, what to bring, what to wear, what are you going to be doing, who's going to be there, is this inside or outside, all of that kind of stuff. Of course, we need a date and time, number of credit hours that this is worth. I should express this is a default. So if this event is 2.5 hours long, we write that in as 2.5. If a volunteer is registered for this event, they will get 2.5 credit hours at the end of the day, unless something happens to adjust that, like using the sign-in console. Again, we'll look at that in a minute. You can also identify how many volunteers are needed for this position, essentially how many vacancies there are. We can identify a contact person, the location of the event. The reason there are two fields for location, the first is used as the name of the location. The second is used as the physical address. So let's say we're meeting at a specific park or maybe a certain pavilion at a certain park. You would write that out in plain language here, but then the location address might be a street address or cross streets or even GPS coordinates. Whatever you would use to direct someone to that point is what you would put in here. And this will get sent to Google and kind of sent to your volunteers that way. So they'll get a map link essentially. While we're looking at this, there is something I want to point out. You can create sort of like templates for yourself within here. We can save locations. Up above, we can save field content in the description section. So we'll see stuff like this throughout service. But I do just want to point that out. That can really help you speed things up if you're making similar events or at least at similar locations. And then we'll look at this later too, but you can also duplicate an event as a whole. So you can use an existing event kind of as a template. Okay, one other really important thing I want to point out is your interests category. In Service, interest categories are kind of like folders. That's how I would think of them. Whenever you create an opportunity, you identify one or two categories that this event fits into. In my demonstration console, I am using two categories. I identify a program for every event and then also a location. So when I'm creating this opportunity, I pick both of those items, and then this can be used to run reports. It can be used to create filters. We looked earlier at like a landing page where volunteers can go and tell me, what program they're interested in or what location they're interested in. And when they make a selection from here, it's going to filter the events based on interest category in this case. So that's a pretty important thing. It really helps with reporting and some of those filtering options. All right, one final really important setting when you're creating an event is publish online. The default value here is no, which means the event will not be publicly posted, which might be perfectly fine. You might have an event that you do not want volunteers to see, but you want to invite certain people to sign up for it. You might think of that as like a private event. There's not a moniker called private event in Service, but this is how we would accomplish that. Leave publish online set to no, and then every event has its own private invite link. I'll show you that in a minute here. But normally you do probably want your events posted. We want volunteers to see this. We want them to sign up for it. All the examples that I showed you where events are publicly posted here, that has required that I change this setting to yes open if I want volunteers to be able to sign up on their own. Any of the other yes options will publish the event, but volunteers will not be allowed to register directly. Now you might have events where you want to publish the event, but not yet. You can set this to yes open, and then under advanced options, there's a setting to schedule a posting date. So maybe I want this event to go live on Friday at noon because I know it's really popular. I'm going to get a lot of hits on this, and I've told people this is when this is going live, right? So you can set the event to yes open, set your scheduled posting date to when you want it to go live, and then the system will take care of the rest. Now, there are a lot of other features in here. We're not going to go through all of these right now, but I do want to mention you can set restrictions in Service. So if you need to limit who is allowed to register for an event, you can do that. The way restrictions function generally is that you're selecting who is permitted to register. So if I want volunteers who are 18 and up, who have passed a background check, that is exactly what I select in here. This is now the set of people who are allowed to register for an event. There is one exception to that. You can create a group and then use a group to disallow certain people from signing up. There's this volunteers assigned to none of the selected groups. So we can do kind of the inverse in here. But generally speaking, we're selecting who is allowed to register for this event. So that's your restrictions. And then the last setting that I want to talk about, because I want to look at this a little bit further, is tags. Tags in Service are kind of what they sound like. They're kind of akin to like a hashtag. You can identify different information about your events and then search by that data. But these can also be surfaced to volunteers by adding stickers to them. So those show up like this kind of like little iconography under your events. You can allow volunteers to click on these if you would like to, which allows them to run searches. So you can kind of permit that sort of behavior, or you can just have them displayed to volunteers if you want to present some information, but you don't necessarily need people to be able to search by it. What these icons are is kind of like a fixed list. It's a very long list. I'll show you that in a minute. There's a lot of different options in there, but what they represent is entirely up to you. You can add whatever language you want to, kind of in conjunction with the image. And then that can obviously communicate lots of different things. In my case, I'm using this to communicate a lot of like accessibility information, like who's welcome at this event or who's this event kind of targeted for. But you could also have these represent lots of other information, like is this event inside or outside? Is this event related to a farm or a sport or something like that? There's all kinds of different data and different images you can use within that. This all begins with creating tags. So in my database, I have a tag that I have already created called wheelchair access, and this is affiliated with that kind of wheelchair icon. So when I add this to an event, then it will also add that icon. If you do not have any tags in your database, or maybe you're trying to create a new tag, when you start typing in here, let's say I want to say this is a soccer event, right? I could start typing that word and we can see it doesn't suggest anything because that doesn't exist yet. If I want to add more tags in here, maybe say this is sports, I could go and add additional tags. And then when I create the event, the system will create those tags and then they'll start getting presented in the future. Now, these tags are on the back end by default, but we can add stickers to them from what's called the tag cloud. So we're going to move away from creating an event here. We're going to go into searching and managing existing opportunities, which is where all of your events are housed once you build them. This includes events in the future as well as events in the past. The default view for this page is to display open opportunities. We'll talk about some of these searches in a minute, but if you go to this page and you don't see what you're expecting, that's probably why. You can search for something by name up at the top. Now, before we get into that, I want to point out we have this tag cloud option up at the top here, and this is where we can go to add stickers, which will show up on our events. So if we click on View Tag Cloud, this shows us all the tags that we've already created in the past. So if I had added that soccer or sports tag in here, that would show up. These are opportunity tags that we're referring to, which is totally separate from volunteer tags or group tags. But these opportunity tags, you can see, can have these icons. If a tag exists, but it does not yet have a sticker, there will be an icon here to apply a tag sticker. And if we click on that, we can give this a title. So maybe I want to call this a library event, and then I can pick what icon to use. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of different options to use in here, so you can go through and pick whatever you'd like to. Again, you can scroll through this on your own. There's a lot of different options within there. If you have any suggestions or questions, again, use that customer support tool. We can make this displayed to volunteers, or we can make it searchable as well. Typically, I like to make these searchable. But if you don't want volunteers sorting by that, you can leave it as display only. And you can also use these as admin only. Sometimes that can be helpful if you want to distinguish what you are creating as like private events or like corporate partner events versus, public facing events. You might have some iconography like that you like to use, and it also can help you do quick searches. And maybe we don't want volunteers to see that. You can do admin only here. But let's make this one searchable. We'll click on Apply Sticker, and now we can see that icon here. And I can click on that if I want to make changes to it. But if I click on the sticker or the tag itself, I can search for all the events that have that icon. Okay, so we're going to move away from creating opportunities and talk a little bit about managing opportunities, and then some other features kind of in that realm, like impact tracking and the sign-in console. So I mentioned before, this page, we went into search and manage existing opportunities, displays all of your open events by default. That is kind of the default view for this page. You can also search for an event by name. If you leave this blank and click Search Opportunity Database, that'll show you everything in the system. You can also explicitly search for closed opportunities. And then, of course, there's also an advanced search to find all sorts of information. So there's some good searching tools within this, including searching by, if something does or does not have a certain tag, if it's within a certain location keyword, or all sorts of stuff like that. Once you've run a search, if that's something that you want to regularly look for, you can also save a search. We'll see this throughout service, including in the volunteer database side, but you could give this a search a title. Maybe this is all of the library events, right? I didn't actually run that search, but we could give it a title. Make this shared or private. Private means I'm the only one who can use this and other administrators. Shared means that all the other users, like leadership team, could use this search as well. And then there's this load saved search option if you want to rerun a search you've saved previously. So there could be a lot of different options within that. Now, as we're looking at these events, the default view is a list view, but you can also pull up a calendar view. If we click on Display Calendar View, we can pop that open, and this just shows what's happening kind of in a more visual manner. These events are color-coded based on how many spaces, or are there spaces remaining, or is it open? So the colors will change depending on that. But we can also click on these events if we want to update them, or view registrations, or manage the event itself, or export it to Google, or anything in those kind of options. There's a bunch of different options within this calendar view, but primarily you might be engaging in this list view. And the reason for that is because you can select multiple events at once and then do different bulk actions. Like maybe I want to email everyone who's registered for an event tomorrow. I could run a search for all my time slot events, select all those events and say, let's email everyone who's registered for an event tomorrow. We're expecting a weather event. So I want to just warn people there might be a closure, right? So you can do things like that. You can email registered volunteers. You can bulk update your events. You can do a bunch of different printouts from here. So there's a lot of bulk actions that you can take in this list view. Other than that, of course, every event can be individually managed. We can click on the name of an event to go to sort of like a main menu for it. And from here, we have lots of options for updating event info, viewing registered volunteers, lots of printouts. Down at the bottom, I mentioned there's an option to duplicate opportunities. So you can make a copy of an existing event and then work within that copy. I also mentioned before, a private invite link, that's going to be housed in here. So if you want to send a private invite to an event that's not publicly posted, this is just in this main menu for the event. Now, as you're looking at registered volunteers on an opportunity, we can do a number of different things from this page. You can sign people up for the event up at the top of the page. You can remove people from the event from this page. You can send emails from here. So there's a number of bulk actions kind of down at the bottom. But this is a screen where I can see sort of like the roster for the event itself. So this is a page that you may spend a little bit more time on if things are kind of moving around normally and you just want to see who's registered or maybe communicate with those people or make some changes from here. A couple things on this page I want to point out. You can mark no-shows. So if someone was registered and they did not attend an event, you could go and mark that person as a no-show. That will do two things. It removes them from the event, and then it also adds a no-show note to their profile, which is something you can search by. You can find people based on how many no-shows they've had in a given time frame or just in general. So it can be helpful for kind of keeping tabs on, do I need to send this person a note and say like, hey, you've had a bunch of no-shows recently. We're going to restrict you from this type of event, right? So you can do different things using that kind of tool. Okay, one other note before we move on from this screen is generally speaking, in Service, when you are taking actions as an admin, nothing that you do is going to send notifications. I mentioned at the top, when a volunteer signs up for an event, they get a confirmation message. If you register a volunteer for an event, that person does not receive a confirmation message unless you select to send it. So you can select a particular registrant and then send them the confirmation email down at the bottom of the page here. But normally, if you are operating as an admin, nothing that you do is going to send emails unless you're clicking a button that actually says send email. And I would view that as a bit of a grace because you can do kind of whatever you need to. You can make changes, move things around, update events, update volunteer profiles, and people aren't getting pinged every time you make changes like that. But then, of course, whenever you do want to let people know, you can update them and send out an email that lets them know. All right. So this is kind of the opportunity management side of the dashboard. We're going to move back a little bit just to talk about a few other features in managing opportunities, and then we will kind of wind down through volunteers and groups. So under opportunity management is where we would open the sign-in console. I've referred to this a couple times now as sort of like a kiosk. You can use this to let volunteers track attendance electronically. This sign-in console is designed to be opened on any sort of internet-connected device, but this would be a device within your control, right? So you are putting out a tablet, you are putting out a laptop for volunteers to check in when they arrive for their events. Maybe sign in, maybe sign out. You don't have to use the sign-in console. It can provide you some extra information like when did people actually arrive or how long did they actually stay, and you can use it to automatically adjust hours for volunteers. You can even use it to automatically mark no-shows. Whenever you create an event, at the very bottom under advanced options, you can tell the system to automatically mark no-shows for that event. And if anyone did not sign in, then they will automatically be marked as a no-show the following day. There's a buffer on that just so you have space to mark if someone did attend. So that sign-in console, again, is intended to be opened on a device that you have set up. And when you do that, it's going to look something like this. So this is the sign-in mode, not the admin mode. But the sign-in mode will just kind of live like this. And if you open this up and you're trying to get back to the admin dashboard and you're not having luck with that, for example, if I close this page, and then we go back and we say, let's reopen the admin login page. Oh, I'm still in the sign-in console. That's intentional. This will lock you into itself, basically because we don't want volunteers navigating out of it. So you can close this by searching for the term exit or close. That'll take you back to the admin login page. But when this is open, a volunteer just searches for their name. You can have some things pop up in here if you need. And then essentially a volunteer can just check in for their shift. So they can sign in for a shift and they can sign out when they leave, and that would record exactly how long they were there. Or you can just have them sign in to track attendance. But like I mentioned before, you do not necessarily have to use the sign-in console. The system assumes that volunteers attended their shift for its full duration, unless something happens to adjust that. Now, if you're interested in the sign-in console, that was a very brief look at that. We have a webinar that deep dives this and kind of goes through all the ins and outs, including having volunteers use their own phone as the sign-in console, as opposed to having a kiosk set up. And that can include even like posting a QR code that volunteers just scan when they arrive, and that sends them to the page to check in. Okay, so that's the sign-in console. There's another feature I want to briefly mention in impact tracking. This is a tool designed to capture additional numerical metrics. So what I mean by that, it's kind of a lot of buzzwords, but if we want to have volunteers tell us, how many bags of trash they removed, or how many miles they drove, or how many pounds of food they sorted, we can ask for those numbers at the end of a shift. And this can be through the sign-in console. So when someone's signing out, they give us all these numbers from what they did in that shift. Typically, this is used to capture metrics like what was accomplished, but these can also be used for sort of like an end of shift survey. It is first and foremost looking for a number, but there is a notes section. So you can ask people to kind of give more information in there as well. But yeah, that's kind of what this feature is. Again, we have an entire webinar dedicated to this if you'd like to learn more about that. But that's the concept of impact tracking. So we're going to switch over to the volunteer database side. A lot of this is pretty straightforward and kind of easy to figure out when you poke around in here. But I want to point out a couple things. Kind of analogous to the opportunity side, actually, we have up at the top, add a new volunteer. And then below that, search and manage volunteer database. And if we go into this page, by default, the system will display no results here. I can search for an individual by name or by an email or tag. And there's, of course, an advanced search tool, which is really robust. You can find volunteers using any of the information that you are tracking, and also things like, have they participated a certain number of times or not a certain number of times? Do they have 0 registrations in a certain time frame, or when is their first registration, or was it last week? You can search for all kinds of different cool things through here. We have a lot of webinars actually kind of really in this realm, like on volunteer retention or on volunteer reporting, but this is a very robust tool. There's a lot of things you can do through here. Suffice it to say, if you are looking for a set of volunteers, you can find them. If you're not sure how to do it, submit a ticket. But we can also leave the search bar blank and click Search Volunteer Database. That will show us everyone in the system. From there, there's a number of bulk actions. So again, similar to the opportunity side, I can send emails from here, do bulk updates, download a spreadsheet of volunteer info. There's a bunch of different things kind of in that realm. Before we get into emailing, I did want to point out, obviously every person also has all these little icons next to their name. You can go directly into manage someone's profile, or there are a number of shortcuts here. All of these shortcuts are also reflected directly within the management menu for that individual. So if we go here, I can see all kind of those account options. We can update info, manage registrations, duplicate accounts, delete accounts if we need to, anonymize profiles. So there's a lot of different things you can do within a profile directly. The last thing I want to mention kind of on the volunteer database side is sending an email. So we can select maybe our whole database if we want to, and then go to send an email. I want to point out, when Service is emailing from this part of the database, it will automatically exclude people that should not get this email. What I mean by that is any individual who has unsubscribed themselves, any person you have marked as inactive, any person with a failed email address, any person obviously who does not have an email address, those people will be excluded from this. You don't need to worry about searching for that. You can just select your whole database and click send email. When you go to send an email, it's going to look something like this. You have a sent from address at the top. If you have questions about this, submit a ticket. You have a reply address. This will default to you. And then below that, really just the email itself. You can use a first name variable. So if we want to say, hi Bruce instead of hi volunteer, we can use that. You do not need to memorize this. Anywhere that this variable is applicable in Service, it's listed in the information box next to that field. And then everything in here is pretty straightforward, right? We're sending an email. We can save templates for ourselves if we'd like to. We can load those up. We can replace or delete templates. That's what all these little kind of envelope icons are down here. You can add attachments when you're sending an email. And then you can either send an email immediately, or you can schedule delivery by picking a date anywhere up to 30 days out. So I do want to point out Service gives you some metrics related to emailing. There's a report that compiles that information. In report management, you can set a date range and then scroll down a little bit here. There's a report called Email Analytics Summary, and that can give you kind of an idea of how your emails are doing essentially. And you can also see those analytics reflected if you go into the system log under system management. You can see kind of everything that's happened in your console, right? But this would also allow you to see things like sent emails. And if you click into view a sent email, you can see up at the top when it was sent, who sent it, and then all the analytics related to that. I should point out your system log records activity for 1 calendar year, and then it starts dropping off the older data. But these emails are also stored in volunteer accounts, and you can always access this data through there. And of course, you can run that analytics report as well. All right. The last kind of major thing we're going to take a look at today is groups. And we have several different webinars on groups in particular, because this can be a pretty complicated beast depending on how you are engaging with groups and really what groups means for you as an organization, right? This might be something internal. It might be separate external organizations, corporate partners, clubs, churches, community groups, schools, things like that are working with you. And if that's the case, then we need to ask ourselves a couple questions like, do I need to know who the individuals are? Do I just want to know a bulk number? Is this group operating within an existing event, or do I need to make a private event for them? All of those things will kind of dictate what you do or how you work with groups in Service. So just very briefly, I want to point out, you can create a group and then just say this group is bringing 15 people. This is what I would refer to as like a bulk anonymous registration. So we can add a new group up here under standard options, give it a name, give it a contact person. And then once you've made that group, you can go in and say, let's register this group for an event. They're bringing 15 people and this is the event. Let's sign them up, right? Again, this is a bulk anonymous registration. I do not know who these 15 people are. I will not be collecting their information. If that doesn't work for you, if I need to know who these 15 people are, if we need to have them sign our terms, I need their emergency contact info, we don't want to do this, right? So instead of this bulk anonymous registration, we can remove this. What we might do instead is either create a private event for that group if they're the only ones who are going to be there, and then I can send them that private event invite. Again, there's no moniker called private event. We just would not publish it. And then we would send out the private invite for that event, right? Every event has this private registration code invitation email, or down here, this private registration code link. So that's one way to handle that. The other way to handle it is if this group is working within an existing event. Maybe they're just taking some of the spots. You know, I work with this group that always sends 2 people, but it's always 2 different people. I just want to set aside the spots for them so that they can fill those positions as they want to. Then that would use what we call a reservation. So this does kind of exactly what it sounds like. You are saving spots for a group within events. And you can save lots of different positions over lots of different events. So maybe I have 15 spots saved in another event using this code. You can just go and select the event, how many spots you want to save, assign that to the reservation, and then we can send out a link, right? I could tell someone what the code is, but that would require that they kind of figure out where to type that in. The best thing to do, in my opinion, is to send out a private invite for them. So there's this reservation code link, which we can just grab and then give them that link however we want to. In fact, you could even create like a QR code if you want to put this on a flyer and have them post this in their office. But we can also send an email from here, and this email also contains that link. But what that link does is it goes straight to your event listing page, but it applies their reservation code, so they only see the spots that were saved for them. They do not see anything else. And as you can see in this example, we can also attach an image to the reservation. So if we want to kind of create like a white glove sort of like landing page for that corporate partner or that group that's working with us, you can just go and download their logo and then upload it through the reservation page. Once you create a reservation code, you can add an image or a photo to it, and then that will just show up on those pages. Okay, this was a very brief look at this concept. If you have questions regarding this, again, we have webinars that cover this subject. So I actually want to step back for a moment. We've talked about a lot of data in the system as a whole. A lot of questions have come through that have been more specific. So those are answered directly by our support. If you do have other questions, again, feel free to write those in. But I want to point out just some general resources that are available to you. I talked earlier today about the support team. If you click on that Need Help button, you can submit a ticket through here. You can look for articles that have to do with particular topics. There's a lot of good information in here, but you can always click on Contact Us and submit a ticket. And then I also wanted to reiterate our YouTube channel. If you go to video.servicetech.com, that will take you here. Again, we have a lot of previously recorded webinars. We have a lot of short form material on here as well. The vast majority of this is for you as kind of staff members, but there are some resources here for volunteers also. Like if you want to teach your volunteers how to print their activity history and run that report themselves, or maybe you have a volunteer base that would like to see how the sign-in console works before they are asked to use it. You could share with them this short video on how to use the sign-in console. So that's kind of what these videos are intended for. But from the admin perspective, we have a lot of information here for you in terms of, running reports or managing the database as a whole. There's a whole slew of videos on working with groups. We just went through that pretty briefly. But all of our previously recorded webinars are posted up here, and there's a lot of good information in that as well. All right. Well, we went through a lot of material today. We kind of took a look at some of the essential features or, an overview of the console as a whole. And of course, we didn't drill down into every single specific here. So as you have questions, please feel free to submit those to our customer support team. But I want to thank you for joining us today and sticking with us through this relatively long webinar. But we look forward to seeing you again in the future for kind of our next subject next month. So please feel free to continue writing in questions as you have those. But we are going to go ahead and shut it down here for today. We'll leave it open as questions still come in. But yeah, thank you for your time and hope you have a good rest of your Wednesday.